It was a typical Tuesday morning in May 2025 when Candace Owens sat in her Nashville studio preparing for her daily podcast. The conservative commentator had built her reputation on bold statements and confrontational interviews. Today, she had a special guest lined up via satellite, Ibrahim Traoré, the 35-year-old president of Burkina Faso. This should be interesting, she thought, reviewing her notes, filled with pointed questions designed to challenge the young African leader. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim was in his presidential office, adjusting his tie before the interview. His communications director, Moussa Cabaret, briefed him on Candace's background. "She's known for aggressive questioning, Mr. President. She tends to interrupt and challenge her guests frequently." Ibrahim nodded calmly. "I've faced worse than an American podcaster. Moussa, let's see what she brings to the table. At 2:00 p.m., Nashville time, 8:00 p.m. in Burkina Faso." The interview began. Candace opened with her signature confidence. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Candace Owens, and today we have Ibrahim Traoré, the so-called president of Burkina Faso. Now, Ibrahim, let's be honest here. You're just another African strongman who took power in a military coup, right?" The question was loaded, designed to put Ibrahim on the defensive from the start. But instead of the flustered response she expected, Ibrahim smiled slightly. "Good evening, Ms. Owens. I appreciate the directness of your question. It shows you've done at least some research, though perhaps not enough." His response was measured, confident, and carried a subtle hint that he wasn't going to be easily intimidated. Candace had interviewed hundreds of guests, but something in Ibrahim's tone suggested this wouldn't go as planned. Candace leaned forward, sensing what she thought was weakness. "Oh, I've done my research, Ibrahim. You're 35 years old, leading on to of the poorest countries in the world. What makes you think you're qualified to run a nation when you've never even run a successful business?" Her tone was condescending, designed to belittle. "I mean, let's be real here. Africa has a long history of failed leadership. What makes you different from all the other dictators who've destroyed their countries?" Ibrahim's expression remained calm. In his office? His staff watched nervously, but Ibrahim had faced hostile interrogations before. "Miss Owens, I notice you're making several assumptions. First, that age determines capability. Second, that poverty is a sign of failure rather than a challenge to overcome. Third, that you understand the complexities of African governance from your studio in Nashville." Candace scoffed. "Don't lecture me about assumptions when you assumed power illegally. My audience deserves to know how many people died in your coup. How many political prisoners are in your jails right now?" The questions were designed to corner him, to make him appear as a typical African dictator. But Ibrahim had anticipated this line of attack. "I'll answer your questions. But first, let me ask you something, Miss Owens. Before we discuss my country's challenges, perhaps you could tell your audience about your own qualifications for international political commentary. What's your educational background in African studies? How many times have you visited the continent you're so eager to criticize?" Candace paused, not expecting the tables to turn so quickly. She had a bachelor's degree in journalism and had never set foot in Africa. "I don't need to visit Africa to recognize tyranny," she shot back, but her voice carried less conviction than before. Ibrahim smiled. "Interesting perspective. So, you can judge an entire continent without ever experiencing it firsthand." The interview was taking an unexpected turn. Candace. Cases chanted. Own for dominating conversations, found herself being questioned by her own guest. "Listen, Ibrahim, I'm the host here. I ask the questions, and my question is simple. Why should Americans care about another African dictator?" Her frustration was becoming evident. Ibrahim leaned back in his chair, completely composed. "Miss Owens, I notice you keep using the word dictator without evidence. Let me share some facts. Since 2022, Burkina Faso has held 3 municipal elections with international observers. Our voter turnout was 89%. We've opened 847 new schools and reduced infant mortality by 31%. Is this the record of a dictator? Candace tried to regain control. Anyone can throw around statistics. But what about freedom of press? What about political opposition? I bet you've silenced all critics. Actually, Ibrahim replied, we have 23 independent newspapers, 15 radio stations, and 8 television channels. Opposition parties hold seats in our parliament. Would you like me to give you their contact information so you can interview them directly? The offer caught Candace off guard. She had prepared for denials, not invitations for verification. That's not the point, she stammered. The point is that Africa needs real leadership, not military strongmen playing president. Ibrahim's eyes sharpened. Miss Owens, I'm curious about your definition of real leadership. You support American politicians who've never served in military, never lived in poverty, never rebuilt a nation from civil war. Yet you question my qualifications despite my military service, my master's degree in public administration, and my direct experience governing. Candace felt the interview slipping away from her control. I'm questioning your legitimacy, not your resume. Then let me ask you this, Ibrahim said, his voice gaining strength. When you look at Africa, what do you see? Because I suspect you see what American media has taught you to see, not what actually exists. Candace realized she was in deeper water than expected. I see a continent that needs guidance, that needs to learn from successful nations like America. I see poverty, corruption, and instability. Ibrahim nodded slowly. And there it is. You see Africa as a child that needs Western guidance. Tell me, Miss Owens, what exactly has American guidance given Africa over the past 60 years? The question hung in the air. Candace knew the history. Decades of conditional aid, structural adjustment programs, and interventions that often made things worse. America has provided billions in aid, she said weakly. Aid that comes with conditions, Ibrahim replied. Aid that often benefits American companies more than African people. Aid that keeps nations dependent rather than independent. Ms. Owens' Burkina Faso has reduced foreign aid dependency by 67% in 3 years. We're building our own economy, training our own teachers, manufacturing our own goods. Is this the behavior of a failed leader? Candace's audience was seeing something they'd never witnessed before, their confident host being systematically dismantled by facts. You're deflecting, she said desperately. The real question is whether you'll step down and allow real democracy. Ibrahim laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. Ms. Owens, I've scheduled elections for next year. I've publicly stated I'll respect term limits. I've invited international observers. Meanwhile, some American politicians served for 40, 50 years in the same positions. Who exactly is clinging to power? The studio in Nashville was silent except for the hum of equipment. Candace's producer was frantically gesturing from behind the camera, unsure whether to continue or cut the interview short. You're twisting my words, Candace said, her voice smaller now. I'm simply responding to them, Ibrahim replied calmly. Miss Owens, you began this interview trying to shame me, but shame requires accepting someone else's judgment of your will. Fourth, I know my worth, my accomplishments, and my responsibilities. Do you know yours? The question hit Candace like a physical blow. For the first time in years, she was speechless on her own show. Ibrahim continued, his voice neither harsh nor gentle, simply factual. You've built a career criticizing people and places you've never studied deeply. You speak with authority about leadership while never having led anything more complex than a media company. You judge entire continents based on headlines rather than understanding. Candace found her voice, but it was shaky. I represent conservative values. I stand for truth and accountability. Do you? Ibrahim asked. Because truth requires research, understanding, nuance. Accountability means acknowledging when you're wrong. When was the last time you did that publicly? The live stream was going viral. Viewers were watching a masterclass in how to handle a hostile interview. Comments flooded in. This African president is destroying Candace with facts and logic. Why doesn't American media ever interview leaders like this? Candace is learning what real leadership looks like. In her studio, Candace could see her staff's faces. They looked embarrassed, concerned, some even impressed by Ibrahim's performance. She had invited him on to make herself look good by comparison, but the reverse was happening. "I think," she said quietly, "we may have gotten off on the wrong foot." Ibrahim smiled genuinely for the first time. "Ms. Owens, there's no shame in admitting that. The shame would be in continuing to speak about things you don't understand. I invite you to visit Burkina Faso, see our schools, our hospitals, our markets, meet our people, then form your opinions." Candace nodded slowly. I might take you up on that offer." "Good," Ibrahim said. "Because the world needs more bridges and fewer walls. Your platform could build bridges if you chose to use it that way." For the first time in the interview, Candace looked genuinely thoughtful rather than combative. "This wasn't what I expected," she admitted. "Truth rarely is," Ibrahim replied, "but it's always worth pursuing." As the interview continued, something remarkable happened. Candace, known for her unwavering confidence, began to show vulnerability. "President Traoré, I have to ask, how do you stay so calm under pressure? I've interviewed hundreds of people, and most get defensive when challenged." Ibrahim considered the question carefully. "Miss Owens, when you know who you are and what you stand for, other people's opinions cannot shake you. I govern 23 million people. Their lives depend on my decisions. Your criticism, while sharp, doesn't compare to that responsibility." The honesty in his response caught Candace off guard. "I suppose I never thought about it that way." "Most Americans don't," Ibrahim said without malice. "Your media presents world leaders as either heroes or villains. Reality is more complex. We're human beings trying to do our best with limited resources and unlimited challenges." Candace leaned forward, her journalistic instincts kicking in. "Tell me about those challenges. What keeps you awake at night?" "Terrorism," Ibrahim said immediately. "When I became president, jihadist groups controlled 40% of our territory. Children couldn't go to school. Women couldn't travel freely. Markets were empty. We've pushed them back. But the threat remains." "How?" Candace asked, genuinely curious now. "By understanding that security isn't just about weapons, it's about giving young people hope, jobs, education. A 19-year-old who can feed his family won't join a terrorist group." Candace's audience was witnessing something unprecedented. Their host actually listening, learning, engaging in substantive conversation rather than performative conflict. That's actually brilliant," she said. "Why don't American politicians understand that?" Ibrahim smiled. "Some do, but it's easier to drop boat. MBS than build schools. Quicker to give speeches than create jobs. American politicians face elections every 2 years. We face the consequences of our decisions every day." The conversation had transformed from hostile interrogation to genuine dialogue. Candace's comment section was exploding with viewers praising both participants. "President Traoré," Candace said, her tone now completely different from the interview's opening. "I need to acknowledge something. I came into this interview with preconceptions about African leadership. You've challenged every single one of them." Ibrahim nodded appreciatively. "Ms. Owens, preconceptions are natural. We all have them. The question is whether we're willing to examine and change them when presented with new information." "But where did I go wrong?" Candace asked, genuinely seeking to understand. "You assumed that American success models apply universally. You equated youth with inexperience rather than fresh perspective. You confused military background with militaristic governance. Most importantly, you judged without seeking to understand." Candace was quiet for a moment. "You're right. I did all of those things. But why? Why do we Americans do this? Because it's easier, Ibrahim replied. It's easier to maintain simple narratives about complex realities. It's easier to feel superior than to acknowledge that other nations might have solutions to problems America still faces. What problems? Candace asked. Healthcare, education, infrastructure, youth unemployment. Miss Owens' Burkina Faso provides free healthcare to all citizens, free education through university. We've built 2,000 kilometers of roads in 2 years. Our youth unemployment has dropped from 47% to 18%. Candace's eyes widened. Those are incredible numbers. Why don't we hear about this in American media? Because it doesn't fit the narrative, Ibrahim said simply. African success stories don't generate clicks or confirm biases. Failure stories do. That's actually shameful, Candace admitted. It is, Ibrahim agreed. But it's also an opportunity. A platform reaches millions. You could change that narrative. Candace sat back, processing everything. I built my career on controversy, on conflict. But this conversation has been more educational than any I've had in years. Conflict has its place, Ibrahim said, but so does curiosity, humility, and genuine dialogue. Your audience deserves both. The interview had become something neither participant expected, a genuine exchange of ideas that elevated both. As the interview entered its final phase, Candace made a decision that would surprise everyone, including herself. President Traoré, I owe you an apology. I invited you here to make you look bad, to confirm my audience's preconceptions about African leadership. Instead, you've shown me what real leadership looks like. Ibrahim received the apology graciously. Ms. Owens, the fact that you can acknowledge this publicly shows your own character. Many people cannot admit when they're wrong. But I was so wrong, Candace said, shaking her head. I assumed you were just another dictator. I didn't research your actual policies, your education, your achievements. I let stereotypes guide my questioning. We all make mistakes, Ibrahim replied. The question is what we do after we realize them. Will you continue with the same approach, or will you change? Candace looked directly into the camera. To my audience, I need to say something. For years, I've prided myself on asking tough questions, but today I learned the difference between tough questions and ignorant questions. President Traoré has shown me that I need to do better. The live chat was going wild. Viewers were witnessing something unprecedented, a popular commentator publicly admitting error and committing to change. What will you do differently? Ibrahim asked. I'm going to accept your invitation to visit Burkina Faso. I'm going to learn about Africa from Africans, not from American media. And I'm going to use my platform to share what I learn, even if it challenges my audience's preconceptions. Ibrahim smiled broadly. Miss Owens, that's the most courageous thing you've said all day. It takes real strength to admit you need to learn. President Traoré, Candace said, I started this interview trying to embarrass you. Instead, I've embarrassed myself. But maybe that's exactly what I needed. Sometimes, Ibrahim replied, our greatest defeats become our greatest victories. Today could be the beginning of something much better for both of us. The interview was ending, but something much more significant was beginning. Within hours of the interview ending, social media exploded with reactions. The hashtag Candace v Traoré began trending worldwide, but not for the reasons Candace had hoped. Twitter was flooded with comments praising Ibrahim's dignity and intelligence while criticizing Candace's initial approach. This African president just gave a masterclass in how to handle a hostile interview, wrote one user. Candace got schooled by someone who actually knows how to lead, posted another. But surprisingly, many comments also praised Candace's evolution during the interview. At least she admitted she was wrong. That takes courage, wrote a supporter. In her Nashville studio, Candace sat alone after her team left, replaying the interview in her mind. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from media outlets wanting her reaction, but she ignored them all. She needed time to process what had happened. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim was in his residence having dinner with his family. His wife Ajara had watched the interview. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You could have humiliated her, but you chose to educate her instead." "Humiliation serves no purpose," Ibrahim replied. "But education can change the world." The next morning, Candace published a blog post titled, "When I Got It Wrong, Lessons from an African President." In it she wrote, "Yesterday, I learned that real leadership isn't about dominating conversations or confirming biases. It's about listening, learning, and admitting when you're wrong. President Traoré taught me more about leadership in 1 hour than I've learned in years of interviewing American politicians." The post went viral, shared by both supporters and critics. Many praised her humility, while others questioned her sincerity. But the conversation had shifted from conflict to contemplation. News outlets across America began reaching out to Ibrahim for interviews. Harvard Business School invited him to speak about African leadership. 3 documentary filmmakers requested access to follow his governance model. "It's remarkable," Musa Kabore told Ibrahim. "One interview has changed how the world sees you and Burkina Faso and how one American sees Africa." Ibrahim added that might be the most important change of all. 6 months later, Candace Owens stood in the courtyard of a newly built school in Ouagadougou, watching children play during their lunch break. She'd kept her promise to visit Burkina Faso, and the experience had fundamentally changed her perspective on Africa and leadership. "I can't believe how wrong I was," she told her camera crew, filming a documentary about her journey. "These aren't the images of Africa that American media shows us. This is progress, prosperity, and hope." Ibrahim joined her in the courtyard, greeting the children who ran to him with genuine affection. "Mr. President," Candace said, "I need to ask you something that's been bothering me. Why were you so patient with me during that interview? I was disrespectful, ignorant, and hostile." Ibrahim smiled, the same calm expression he'd worn during their first encounter. "Ms. Owens' anger would have confirmed your expectations. Hostility would have validated your preconceptions, but patience and facts, those could change your mind. And changing one mind can change many others." The documentary titled "The African President Who Changed My Mind" would go on to win 3 Emmy Awards and fundamentally shift American perceptions of African leadership. Candace's show evolved from confrontational interviews to educational conversations. Her audience initially resisted but gradually embraced the change. "I learned that real courage isn't about attacking others," she said in her final interview of the series. "It's about admitting when you're wrong and choosing to grow." Ibrahim watched the documentary from his office in Ouagadougou, surrounded by his cabinet. "Do you think she'll stick with this new approach?" asked Dr. Ouedraogo, his foreign minister. "Time will tell," Ibrahim replied, "but she took the first step, which is often the hardest." The transformation was complete. What began as an attempt to shame an African leader had become a lesson in dignity, growth, and the power of genuine dialogue. Candace had learned that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from being willing to learn from them. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, Ibrahim reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them together. Sometimes he thought the most important victories come not from defeating your opponents, but from turning them into allies. The interview that was supposed to embarrass him had instead created an opportunity for understanding that would ripple across continents for years to come.